Hello, and welcome to the Lucion Environmental podcast channel with me, Grace Matthews. The year 2014. 15 years since a complete ban of asbestos products and almost 30 years since the really nasty stuff was banned. I'm joined today by Managing Director of Lucion, Dr. Patrick Morton. Patrick, welcome. So asbestos in schools, still an issue?
Grace, that's a good question. If we think about when the majority of the built education stock was constructed in Britain, it stands to reason an awful lot of it was constructed in the early, late 60s and 70s. So yes, a lot of it does contain asbestos. In fact, surveys would suggest about 75% of built school stock contains asbestos.
75% is still such a huge amount. Let's take a look at a nationwide survey published in 2010 of nearly 600 school safety reps. Only 28% of respondents said that ACMs were clearly marked, only 1/3 said they was aware that a register was kept, and only 20% confirmed that asbestos records were shown to visiting contractors. Why do you think this is?
I think it probably comes down to an awareness of what is required by the asbestos regulations, and more specifically Regulation 4, which is the duty to manage asbestos in non-domestic premises. It requires people to be trained, to have a certain level of competency, even if that's only basic asbestos awareness, if they may come into contact with asbestos during their day-to-day works. And obviously it's important that those in a management position or occupying the position of duty holder towards the asbestos regulations have awareness over their responsibilities. And I think that's where these rather shocking statistics may emanate from.
So, should duty holders be worried about inspections taking place? I only asked this question based on a piece of information I found online. In 2011, the government announced it would no longer undertake proactive inspections in the workplace defined as low risk. This includes shops, offices and schools. So how would this then affect asbestos management in the education sector?
I think undoubtedly we could end up with unsafe standards or schools that aren't complying with the regulations passing by undetected. I can see what the government means in terms of low risk, but actually the school population has been found through research to be at much higher risk from exposure to asbestos. So one would hope that that should maybe be taken into account in the risk assessment.
We'll focus on academy schools in a later podcast, but just as an example, what would an HSE officer be looking for with regards to asbestos management in an academy school?
That's an interesting question. I think they'd be looking for a number of criteria to be fulfilled. Firstly, surrounding management arrangements, and I think they'd want to gain the level of understanding in the school. First things first, has a management survey been carried out? And a few questions around that management survey. Was the surveyor who did the work competent? One very easy way and the most reliable way in the UK to prove this is to engage a UCAS accredited inspection body, and that way their competence and necessary processes have been independently validated. Looking further at the survey, they would want to see the asbestos containing materials that have been highlighted and whether or not any updates are required to that survey to make it compliant. Then they would want to look at the asbestos management plan arrangements. Now, the management plan, very simply put, is a document that outlines the actions that are going to be undertaken with respect to various asbestos containing materials shown in the survey. And they would want to see whether the plan was comprehensive or indeed was in need of some update, or if no plan was actually in existence. The next thing that they probably want to see is whether or not the management plan identifies the risks associated with the condition of the asbestos containing materials. And this is where the annual or more frequent re-inspection of asbestos containing materials comes into its own, to be able to assess the risk from the various materials in the school. They would then want to see if the management plan identifies the risk associated with the location of the asbestos containing material, and this is crucial in schools. Obviously corridors and areas of high throughput can be areas of high damage towards asbestos containing materials, whereas locations that are entered less frequency may present less of a risk, and this is where the priority assessment can start to come into its own. Another aspect that they're probably going to want to look at is whether or not the school has an effective system in place for control of contractors, whether they be in-house or external, to consult the register to ensure that they're not going to disturb any asbestos containing materials. And lastly, but very importantly, do people who may carry out work of a maintenance nature in the school have appropriate training in the event that they may come across asbestos during those maintenance activities, i.e. have they got appropriate asbestos awareness training. And again, I would say independent validation is important here. There's a whole range of courses out there at the moment, but a UCATA or IATP registered course is definitely the route to go, with some form of formal recognition and examination at the end of the course.
That's quite a comprehensive list, and I think many would agree asbestos guidance can be confusing at the best of times. What do you think could be done to assist busy head teachers and governors who maybe don't know the full responsibilities of the duty?
It is, Grace. There are an awful lot of facets to it, and that I gave previously was a very basic run through. There are many fringe cases and other scenarios. My advice would be engage a consultant to guide you through it, put the necessary steps in place, and undertake some sort of annual agreement with them to undertake the re-inspection and various updates of asbestos containing materials as you go.
Just taking a look at America, 25 years ago, a law was passed in the US that parents and teachers must be given an annual report on the present condition of asbestos in their school and the measures taken to manage it. What's common practice here?
I didn't know that, actually. It's certainly not common practice in the UK. I suspect under freedom of information, parents could indeed request the current status of asbestos in schools that their children go to, but there's certainly no regulatory requirement or obligation by the Department of Education for such material to be published.
So in conclusion, what simple steps could be taken to ensure the effective asbestos management in schools?
Well, it's a tricky one to answer in a brief conversation like this. The HSE website has got a lot of good content. One thing that will undoubtedly prove useful to duty holders in schools, though, is our white paper, which can be got from www.lucion.co.uk/education, and that goes into a lot more detail as to the obligations of duty holders in educational properties, and that will be coming out later this month.
Thanks, Patrick. And for more information on Lucion Podcast, please visit www.lucion.co.uk/podcasts.